Now that we know some basic ecological concepts and vocabulary terms, we need to take a little bit of a deeper study into populations. So remember what level we're thinking about when we think about a population. A population is all the organisms of the same species in an area. So one thing that you can study about populations is their dispersion, or how they spread themselves out with others in their population. There are three main population dispersions that you need to be able to recognize from examples and from images such as these little graphs here. So the first type of population dispersion is known as clumped. With clumped, these are going to be things such as schools of fish, where you have a large group of the organisms and then lots of empty space between, and then another group of organisms. So they're clumped together into groups, okay, and then lots of space in between. So that's called a clumped population dispersion. Another one is known as a uniform population dispersion. This is where organisms space themselves out evenly so that they have their own personal space. We see penguins doing this, and also when humans plant a forest, they tend to plant it in uniform rows of trees. You may have noticed that driving down the highway sometimes. So they're evenly spaced out. And then the next one we have is random. Random is where there's no real pattern to it. They're just scattered. And this is what you tend to see with natural plant populations. A lot of insect populations, they're just randomly dispersed with no significant pattern. When we talk about populations, we can say that there are two main types. You have R strategists and K strategists. And this depends on sort of how they live their life. So R strategists have a very short lifespan. They tend to have a really small body size, but they reproduce really quickly. Like they can reproduce every week. And when they do reproduce, they have lots and lots and lots of babies. And they have very little parental care. So these guys, it's all about quantity, producing lots and lots and lots and living their life quickly while producing lots and lots and lots. So these are things that we think of as pests, weeds and bacteria and roaches and ants. Okay, they don't take care of their babies. They just produce lots of them and then move on. Okay, so this is the R strategist. Make sure you can tell the difference between the R and the K. The K is kind of like the opposite. They have a very long lifespan, tend to have a large body size, reproduce slowly, so it takes many years before they reproduce again sometimes. And when they do reproduce, they have very few young, usually only one or two at a time, and they provide lots of parental care. So for the K strategist, it's all about quality of offspring because they're going to live a long time, so they're going to take care of their babies. They tend to be more intelligent. Examples are giraffes and humans and elephants and rhinos. Okay, so it's all about the quality of the offspring. There's very few of them, so they take very good care of them to raise them into adulthood. So let's talk about population growth. So a population size. And to do that, we need to remind ourselves of the word carrying capacity. Okay, the carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals of a particular species that the environment can support. Okay, so if the number of individuals goes above the carrying capacity, they're going to start to die off because they're not going to have everything that they need because the environment cannot provide it for them. Okay, we need to be able to recognize population growth patterns from graphs. Now, I'm going to talk about humans first because humans are different than everything else. Okay, so human graphs tend to show up like this, where, okay, so this is one graph. This is for growth in Kenya. This is going to be the population growth. Okay, one side of the graph represents male population, the other side female population. And then as you go up, each bar is going to represent an age group. Okay, so if we look at this first graph, we see that most individuals are between the ages of 0 to 9 years old. And there are very, very few elderly people, okay? What this means, if you see a graph that looks like this, it kind of looks like a pyramid, what you can do is you can predict future growth. And that's what the kind of questions they're going to ask you is they're going to say, based on this image, what do you predict is going to happen to the population in the future? Well, when it's shaped like this, like a pyramid, then you're going to have rapid growth in the near future. Okay, why is that? Well, that's because you have a ton of babies down here. They're not reproductive age yet, but when they get older, they're going to become reproductive age. And so that means there's a lot of them getting into the reproductive age and going to be making babies, meaning they're going to be making lots of babies. Okay, so shape like this means rapid growth. If you have something that looks like this, you may have some slight growth because you have some growth here in the reproductive age. But this is going to show either very slow growth or even no growth. And same with this one. See how it's about the same all the way through? No growth. Now, if you have one that looks like an upside down pyramid, very, very few babies getting up into reproductive age, and then lots of old people, that's going to show a decline in the future. Okay, but the main ones they're going to show you are ones that look like this, which means rapid growth, and ones that look upside down to this, which is going to mean decline. Okay, if you don't understand this, please pause now and ask me about it. Okay. Now, out in nature, we're not going to draw graphs like that. We're going to draw line graphs. This graph is going to represent linear growth. Linear growth means a constant increase in the population, meaning constant reproduction rate. This doesn't really happen in nature. It's not really realistic, but every once in a while they like to show it to you and say, what type of growth does this represent? And it would just be linear growth because it's a straight line. Okay, so it's good for helping think of theoretical ideas, but it's not really realistic. Next we have this guy. This is called a J curve because it kind of looks like the letter J. It is also known as exponential growth. Okay, exponential growth. This is where you have sort of explosive reproduction occurring because you have very few individuals and they reproduce, but most of their young survive because there's not a lot of competition. So then they produce lots of young, and then those lots of young survive and produce lots of young. So then you have exponential growth where the growth rate, the population increases exponentially. It's kind of explosive. Now, this occurs in real life under ideal conditions. Okay, very low competition, lots and lots of resources, not a lot of predators taking you out. But the problem with this is you can't have exponential growth forever and ever and ever because the environment cannot support an infinite amount of individuals. So you tend to see this for a short time. For example, when you first get infected with bacteria, the bacteria will show exponential growth inside your body. Okay? Same thing with founder effects and bottlenecks. When there's a very small population, there's very little competition and lots of resources, so they can experience exponential growth. Now, what we see in real life over a long time is this. It's called an S curve because it kind of looks like a wonky letter S. But this is also known as logistic growth. This is what you see in real life happening over periods of time. Make sure that you can label a graph like this with what is happening, or if I give you a graph and I point to part of it and I say, what's happening here? You need to be able to explain it, okay? So what happens in the beginning? Beginning growth is exponential growth. Little competition, lots of resources. But what happens is as that exponential growth is happening, you're going to reach a point where the environment cannot support any more individuals. This is called the carrying capacity, okay? And then what's going to happen to the population at the carrying capacity is usually it's going to go over the carrying capacity a little bit. But then there's going to be high competition, not enough things supporting it, so you're going to have a die-off. And then the population is going to drop below the carrying capacity. Well, then everybody's good, so they're going to start reproducing again and go above it. So you're going to see this fluctuation that goes above and below the line as it fluctuates around that carrying capacity, okay? Now, what can happen is this carrying capacity, it can change based on environmental changes. For example, What do you think would happen to the carrying capacity if we introduced a predator to the population we're studying? Well, hopefully you said that the carrying capacity will lower. Okay, if you introduce a predator, then what's going to happen is that predator is going to start eating on these individuals. And so the carrying capacity is going to go down because they have something new. Okay, now let's remove that predator. What happens to that carrying capacity line? It's going to go back up again. Okay, so make sure you understand how this carrying capacity line works. If not, pause now and ask, because you need to be able to predict what will happen to the carrying capacity if something is introduced. Okay, if it's something bad for the individual, carrying capacity is going to go down. If it's something good for the individuals, carrying capacity is going to go up.